Welcome to episode 26 of the G2 on 5G. It's the latest inside scoop on everything related to 5G, and this week, 6G. We cover 6 topics in about 15 minutes, and it's brought to you by More Insights and Strategy. I'm Will Townsend, and joining me again this week is my fellow partner in crime, Anshel Sag. So let's get started with my first topic. And I tweeted this out earlier, but Nokia may be helping to deliver 5G to the moon. It's incredible. It's no secret that in 2024, NASA is planning another visit to the lunar surface. And Nokia has actually been given $14 million to build out initially an LTE network. And this will be for communications, obviously. So NASA envisions that it'll be a very reliable link for habitat communication to, lunar rovers, as well as just NASA's general, connectivity to manned spacecraft. So it's super exciting. And so initially it's going to be LTE, but obviously once they get that infrastructure laid out, they want to move that to 5G. So I just thought this was pretty cool. It's sort of mind blowing to think that 5G may be coming to the moon in the near future. What are your thoughts, buddy?
It's interesting. I actually think that the way the process of acquiring these kinds of contracts, this has probably been a 5 to 10 year process to actually get this started. So I would have liked to see it be a 5G network just to give it more long-term redundancy and future-proofing. But I know that, on the moon, they probably won't have to deal much with interference from other networks or other signals.
I don't think so.
I think
unless the Martians are, trying to hack in, right?
But I do think it's going to be interesting how they handle, the radiation and other radio signals from space that we don't have to deal with on Earth.
Yeah, no, it's super cool. I'm a science fiction nerd, so when I saw that news break, I had to share it on Twitter. So we'll keep our eyes on that. Let's move to your first topic this week, and you want to talk about some base station deployment activity between Verizon, Ericsson, and Qualcomm.
Yeah, so Verizon basically during this week kind of announced that they've really been accelerating their 5G deployments, and that in the last quarter, which was Q3, they deployed more base stations in Q3 than they did in all of 2019. Which makes sense because, a lot of operators didn't really start deploying until mid-year, although April was kind of where it started. So more than half of the year, they were able to do it in one quarter. So I think realistically, that's only going to continue to ramp, especially for somebody like Verizon that's so dependent on millimeter wave. But I think it's a positive thing. The other thing that was kind of announced this week on the Verizon side was that they are going to have, or they were able to achieve 5 gigabits per second downlink speed in partnership with Ericsson and Qualcomm. Obviously, Ericsson was the infrastructure provider and Qualcomm was the chipset/device provider. But this shows that, they're able to actually hit 5 gigs per second with millimeter wave, which is almost, inching closer to that 7.5 theoretical peak that the chipset's capable of. So we'll see if they can go further. I think they will. I personally have used Verizon's millimeter wave network with the Lenovo Flex 5G, and I was able to get north of 2 gigs per second. And I was actually able to get pretty good signal. Actually, I think my experience with the signal was much better than I was expecting. Most people say you're only going to get a couple hundred feet out of it at best. But I was able to get about 300 to 400 feet, if not 500 feet. But it was line of sight. And the second I lost sight of the tower, I immediately lost signal.
How much of this do you think is like, Verizon's expertise, or is it leaning into Ericsson and Qualcomm from an infrastructure perspective?
I honestly think it's kind of a collaborative effort because obviously Ericsson has to deploy, new algorithms on their equipment to, improve throughput, and Qualcomm has to do the same thing on the device side. And Verizon has to be able to do it, in delivering it on their network. So I think it's kind of a little bit of everybody. But yeah, I think, obviously the hardware providers are doing a lot of heavy lifting, but
Yeah,
if, they don't have a network to run it through, then it's useless.
exactly. Yeah, interesting. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see like what Verizon's competitors do in the coming months, right? AT&T and T-Mobile in the U.S. So we'll
Definitely.
keep our eyes
They,
on that and share
they
the input.
definitely they definitely have the speed claim for sure.
Yeah, for sure. Cool. Well, let's move to my second topic. And actually, Qualcomm's a great segue. Many of us at More Insights and Strategy attended the virtual Qualcomm 5G Summit. Many of us, Patrick and I, our principal, were there last year in Barcelona. And so this year was virtual, obviously. I kind of liked, they did this virtual conference room thing, which I thought was a little kitschy, but it was still pretty cool. But, one of the big takeaways for me, because I cover infrastructure, was their broader push into RAN. And it's no secret that companies like Airspan have been leveraging the Snapdragon platform with their small cell products, and we've talked about that before. Airspan built Sprint's Magic Box, and so this announcement really extends their reach into the RAN in small cell. And so they had Samsung on virtual stage with them as well, talking about some of the design wins. And I counted 12 total partners. So, in addition to Airspan and Samsung, 10 others as well. And so, this is, it's smart on Qualcomm's part, because obviously, they own the end device, right? I mean, they're in the majority of end devices, including the initial Apple products that we talked about last week. And so, moving in the infrastructure, I mean, from my perspective, I mean, Qualcomm is doing a lot to really drive the 5G ecosystem. And I know that you spend a lot of time with them as well. I would love to get your insights.
Yeah, so I think this 5G summit is an interesting one
Mm-hmm.
because it's obviously the first virtual one they've ever done, and I've attended them before. But these 5G summits tend to be more along the lines of enablement. So it's a lot less device centric. It's more about the technologies that enable the experience, and it's usually very operator focused. In previous years, most of the 5G summits have been in Asia and have been pretty Asia focused, but they've slowly pivoted to a much more global perspective. And I think this 5G summit really nailed that home
Mm-hmm.
with the RAN announcement, because you saw operators from Europe, the US, Asia, all over the place kind of touting how valuable this 5G RAN is for disaggregating the network and enabling more competition and theoretically cheaper network deployment costs.
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
think it's overall it's in line with what a lot of the disruptors in the industry want, but it also seems to all address some of the needs of the incumbents as well, right? Because they've already been providing some of these devices and platforms for operators in the past.
Yeah. My other observation too is like, Qualcomm continues to help operators, optimize their investments in, infrastructure and spectrum with things like dynamic spectrum sharing, as well as, just, providing, and driving, kind of volume against the ecosystem. So,
Well, the other thing is a lot of people don't really know that a component of what Qualcomm does is also like going out to network operators and providing like consulting services
mhm,
to help them figure out, where they could improve their network to, hit better peak speeds or, maximize the performance of the devices they're using.
yeah,
It's kind of like a thing that Qualcomm provides that they don't really advertise,
yeah.
um, but it's definitely something that they do, and it's a component of their business. And it explains why Qualcomm has such a good relationship with operators, because they're kind of a consultant to the operators in a way that most people aren't even aware of.
Yeah, that's a great observation. And I'm also impressed that I think we've spoken about this before, what Qualcomm is doing to improve, propagation with millimeter wave, right? They're
Totally.
doing some really interesting things there as well.
Yeah, they've done lots of interesting simulations to kind of simulate, what kind of density is necessary, how many base stations are needed. They've been kind of improving their models as the propagation improves. And I think that's a component of having good antennas on the devices that can really get the signal, because mobile millimeter wave is massively different than fixed. Fixed millimeter wave has been used for years, and that's you can kind of tune that in as you use it just to find just the right frequency and the right antenna amplification and stuff like that. But when it's mobile, it's constantly changing, and you don't you have a limited battery that you can work with. So it's a much more challenging problem, and I think it's only going to improve, which it has been for the last year or two. But I think it's a matter of time until it continues to get better.
Yeah, no, I agree, and I'm sure I'm planning an article as it wraps, and there may be other analysts on the More Insights and Strategy team that plan Forbes articles as well. So stay tuned there. But let's shift to your second topic, and you want to talk about China Mobile and their subscriber ads.
Yeah, so China Mobile, the biggest operator in China, and arguably the largest 5G operator in the world, it reported that they added an additional 44 million new 5G subscribers to their existing user base, which means that since our last podcast that we talked about this, they are now at 104 million 5G subscribers. They had 70 million in June, and they are now at 104. Or actually, I think that math is 114, but I think it's 104.
Yeah.
I have to double check. But
it's in the triple digits.
It's over 100 million now. Yeah. So they're now over 100 million 5G subscribers, which makes them the biggest 5G network. And I think it's in line with the expectations of what we saw, saying that we fully expected them to break 100 million this year, because they are kind of the driving force behind that 200 million plus 5G subscribers by the end of the year. And they're not alone in China. So I think in total in China, there's like over 140 million subscribers on 5G already. So I think it's a matter of time until we crack 200 million globally. We'll probably do it this quarter. And I think it's going to continue to accelerate to the point where I think we'll probably break 500 million next year.
Yeah, those are staggering numbers. And I mean, how do you think they're achieving this? I mean, are they kind of focused on, low pricing and, access, or are they being innovative with actual discrete enterprise and consumer services, or all of the above, in your opinion?
I don't think enterprise is really where they're getting scale right now. I think it's all consumer. There's so many 5G devices already available in China. Every major Chinese OEM is offering 5G devices in many flavors and many price ranges.
Yeah.
And I think it's really a question of, do they have the coverage? And in China, the perception around 5G is you have to have it. And if you don't have it, you're behind. So, and that's just generally, aligns with Chinese culture with, having the latest technology.
Right.
So I think that it's normal, it's expected. And I think it's going to continue to accelerate to the point where you'll probably see, 5G device sales surpassing 4G device sales probably next year in China at least. Maybe a year after that, but I think they're going to really put their foot on the gas as these networks start to roll out, because they've already rolled out hundreds of thousands of base stations. So they're already building quite considerable coverage, at least in the cities. I think China's going to have the same problems with rural coverage as the US. But ultimately, China has the scale. I think the only other country that's going to, maybe get to that kind of rapid scale will be India.
Right. Based on population,
totally, and density. But it'll be interesting to see, how Geo rolls out their own network, because they're doing it, of course, with proprietary equipment, but it's equipment that they are using the Qualcomm 5G RAN. And they're saying they can do a gig, and as far as I know, a gig is pretty good in India, especially considering the pricing schemes that they're probably going to be offering. So I think that China Mobile is kind of leading the charge in terms of subscribers, but they're also like the largest in the world. So it's not really
Mhm.
a shock that they would also have the most 5G subscribers. But it's a considerable amount. I think it's more than 10% of their subscriber base now.
Yeah, no, it's totally impressive. It'll be interesting to kind of keep a tab on that and come back and provide updates as we see these deployments grow in size. So let's move to my third topic this week, and I alluded to it at the beginning of the podcast, 6G. And there was a 6G symposium this week as well. So like this week and last week, it's just been analyst, event palooza. And so it's hard to kind of keep up with all this. But so I tuned in on day one and tuned into a pretty interesting session that talked about what several companies, including Keysight Technologies, believe are key enablers for 6G and to support 6G.
Mhm.
And the sort of the nuggets that I kind of pulled out of it was time engineered networks, right? AI, no surprise, and then sub terahertz radio. And I'm not an engineer, but I play one on TV. But there wasn't a lot of discussion around necessarily use case. But it's still very nascent, right? We're still
Yeah.
rolling out 5G as we speak. So I think a lot of this is just sort of pie in the sky considerations. I didn't see 3GPP, participating in this. So obviously they
No.
drive standards, but I don't know. What are your thoughts?
I mean, my thoughts around 6G is one, that it's mostly a thought process right now.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think I've said this before, we don't know what we can and can't do with 5G.
Yeah.
So I think it's really hard to nail down what we intend to do with 6G. I think we'll probably start to realize what we can and can't do with 5G next year when
Mm-hmm.
everybody has SA and everybody starts deploying network slicing and actually has a network that they can really put devices on. That's when I think people will actually really start to have ideas of what we want in 6G. But ultimately, I think higher frequency only introduces more problems.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and millimeter wave is already a challenge.
Exactly. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
going sub terahertz or terahertz is inherently problematic, and you become much more sensitive to like moisture and humidity
Yeah.
and
Exactly. Yeah.
time of day and interference with the radiation from the sun and all these, even more, it becomes just way more sensitive. So I'm
Right.
much more interested in seeing and hearing about how people want to implement AI into the 5G network.
Yeah.
I think that's kind of a common theme I've seen across all talks about 6G, where AI is like a native thing.
Right.
Because right now 5G and AI is a 5G and AI as opposed to 6G being AI. So I think that's an interesting discussion. And I also think there's going to be more talk about kind of use cases that would benefit from that. Um, but ultimately, I don't think 6G will be as transformative as 5G was compared to 4G.
I believe you're correct on that assumption. And, you and I have kind of talked about, dedicating a podcast in the future to the application of AI into 5G. In fact, I wrote an article, I think I beat you to the punch on it, right, on Forbes. And if our listeners and viewers go to the More Insights and Strategy landing page on Forbes, you can find that article that I wrote. And I kind of focused on sort of what I believe are four kind of practical applications of AI within 5G. But yeah, I agree with you. I mean, what we're seeing from an improvement in latency and overall throughput moving from LTE to 5G, I would be shocked if we're going to see that same kind of quantum level, improvement as we move from 5G to 6G, but time will tell. So, but let's move to your last topic this week. And T-Mobile announced their 5G venture fund. So why don't you give us an overview of what that's all about?
Yeah, so 5G announced a new venture fund that called T-Mobile Ventures.
Mm-hmm.
This is obviously a component of the fact that T-Mobile is now a very large carrier and is launching 5G nationwide. And well, actually already has it, but
Yeah.
they're clearly trying to build out a much more business-centric component of what they do, because inherently T-Mobile has been a very consumer-centric company. And they obviously absorbed the Sprint business side, but Sprint's business side was still nowhere near as big as AT&T or Verizon's.
Right.
And I think T-Mobile's really trying to grow that side of the business. and encourage more companies and partners to build 5G applications for their network, or any 5G network for that matter, right? But ultimately to utilize their 5G network for 4 different areas, which are edge compute, security, the future of work, and industrial IoT, which all sound very enterprisey, and focus on business use cases of 5G, which make 100% sense. The only thing that I would say was kind of disappointing about this announcement was they didn't say how much money they're committing to it, which is a bit odd for a venture announcement, because usually when you make any kind of fund, you usually say how much money you're committing to it. So I hope it's at least $10 million, because you need a lot of money to invest in companies that are going after 5G problems. I think realistically somewhere in the 50 million range would make sense, especially considering that a lot of these companies are probably not small startups anymore. They're probably mid-size, and a small investment of $1 million to $2 million won't make much of a difference. But we'll see what they target. But generally speaking, I think it's a positive move for them. And they're working with a venture capital fund to manage this fund. So it's not necessarily being managed specifically by T-Mobile themselves, which is probably a good thing. But yeah, it's a good thing for T-Mobile, and I hope they give out more details in terms of the size and scope.
Yeah, no, I do as well. And SoftBank had that Vision Fund, right? I think it was like the number was staggering. Was it $1 billion US?
100 billion.
Was it 100 billion? I mean, my goodness, right? And that was pretty.
They do most of it.
Yeah, they do. Like we've talked about that in the past as well. But no, I think this is great. This supplements, a lot of the carriers' efforts. Like I've spent time with AT&T and their labs and their foundries, and I spent time with Verizon at their Alley, facility in Chelsea as well. And I think that this is great. I mean, earmarking funds and that's really going to drive innovation from my perspective. So, I expect that we'll see not only, carriers in the US following suit, but certainly we should expect to see that from, the larger parent Deutsche Telekom in Germany, as well as possibly Telefonica and others. So it'll be interesting to kind of keep tabs on that. So, well, hey, Anshel, another great podcast. Why don't you take us home?
Sure. We hope our viewers this week and our viewers and listeners this week found this week's topics interesting. If anyone out there would like to provide us insight on a specific 5G topic for a future podcast, please reach out to us on social media. Will is at Willtown Tech, and I'm at Anshel Sag. We hope that you guys have a great weekend, and please tune in again next time.